Welcome to my presentation on understanding my community better, conducting a sociological inventory. So this particular assignment was a little bit difficult for me. I think in terms of looking at a particular community that I work in, because I do not work in a brick and mortar school. I work at a virtual school, and so our students come from all across the state of Idaho. That's really the only requirement that we have, is that they live in Idaho, anywhere in Idaho. And so it really isn't really what I would define as a community where we have simple customs and traditions and things that we do specifically in our community. And that's because, like I said, they come from all across Idaho. So I did try to focus just on Idaho and look at some of the different areas in Idaho. Um, and with that, when we get into this, Idaho really isn't especially diverse compared to a lot of other states and areas of the country. So um, I would say that some of the things that we do have in common in terms of custom traditions that really do are true of all parts of the states is agriculture. Idaho is primarily an agricultural state. We have potatoes, ranching, farming all across. So in the southwestern and the south central area, we have a lot of ranching and farming, a lot of hay, potatoes, sugar beets, all of that. East Idaho, again, is a lot of farming, ranching, potatoes. When you get into the western part of the state, we have probably more ranching, and then when you get up into the north, not as much agriculture, but probably a little bit more recreation. So, like I said, recreation is another thing that I think that all communities across the state have: hiking, fishing, camping, skiing, hunting. All of those things are, I think, what a lot of people do for recreation. You know what I mean? Um, Education and technology is also one that I think is important across the state of Idaho. We have three major universities: Boise State, Idaho State University, and the University of Idaho, and they're all state sponsored, along with several other universities that are private. Um, and then as far as technology, so in the west, in the Boise area, we have Micron, which is a very large technology company. And then in the east, we have INEL, which is a government sponsored nuclear reactor, which employs a lot of technology type people. So, yeah, so although Idaho is very diverse, when we get into it, we're going to see that maybe it's not quite as diverse as some other places in the country. So, in terms of population, almost 90% of the state of Idaho is white. So, in terms of ethnic or cultural, not as diverse as maybe some other places. So I think the next area would, in this particular one, it says two or more races, but that is probably going to be Hispanic people. And then in terms of language, so 89%, almost 90% of the population speak English as their primary language. And then non-speaking English people would be 7.8 would be Spanish speaking. And then we have other European languages, Asian Pacific Islander, and then all other language. So really, when it comes to languages, we have English and Spanish. So there is a significant amount of Hispanic populations within our schools and within our communities. And that's something that does need to be addressed. And I think in terms of, when you have a population diversity like this, where primarily it's white, I think a lot of times the other ethnicities can kind of get left behind because they're like, oh yeah, but most of us speak white. And I think that's sometimes when I think we ignore the other ethnicities, and particularly in schools. Let's talk about our economy. So Idaho does fairly well. We don't have a huge rate of people that are struggling. Of course, they're all across the country, but we'll look at some of these things. So families, the median family income would be 75,000, and the mean 97,000. So well within the middle class. Households 63, mean 83. Married families, anywhere from the median is 84,000 all the way up to the mean of 106,000. So they do pretty well. Non-families 36,000 median and 50,000 mean. And then when we're looking down here at the poverty rates, so whites, there are a total of 1.4 or so million people in Idaho, white people in Idaho, and 145,000 of those would be in poverty. So about 10%. Hispanics is a little bit higher at 16, almost 17%. Multiple ethnicities would be 13%. And then we're going down. So we're looking at Native Americans, 25 or almost 26%, Asian, 14%, Black, 24 or 25%, and Islander is 32%. So when we're looking at this particular chart, we're thinking, considering that anywhere from the multiple down is probably about 3 or 4% of our population, really we're looking at the Hispanics and the whites in that poverty area. So that's something to be concerned about as well. And then I wanted to look at the education level here. So, in terms of the education level in Idaho, we talked about this with the colleges and universities that we have in Idaho. So, we'll look at the largest one, which is the one in purple. So, high school graduates, 26% are high school graduates. And the next one is the orange. So, 25, almost 26% have some college. 19% have a bachelor's degree, almost 10% have an associate's degree, 9 or almost 10% have a graduate degree. And then we're looking at these small areas. So if we're looking at the green, that's 9th to 12th grade. So these people are not graduated from high school. And then the blue is less than 9th grade level. So although we do have these areas down here where people are less educated, primarily most people graduate, most people have some college, and even all the way up to graduate level. So, yeah, so not as bad as maybe some other places in the country. And now I wanted to think about social tensions, and there's not a lot of social unrest in the state of Idaho. We're pretty chill here. And I would say that in most communities in the state. But in terms of some of the things that I think affect the culture, I would think in North Idaho, there has been some things in the past, not so much now, but in some things in the past where we have some white supremacy. I remember in Coeur d'Alene, every year they used to have a white supremacy parade, which is kind of scary. They don't have it anymore. It's not allowed. In East Idaho, we're predominantly Christian, and I would say with a high population of LDS or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which does affect the culture in those areas. So a lot of it in the south and then in the southeast area of the state. And then across the state, we are primarily conservative and Republican. I think Idaho is one of the states, we'll get into this in just a minute too, that is one of the highest rates of Republican voting. So yeah, which can create some tension. Obviously, there's a lot of division in the country today. So I know that there was some a slide that we were supposed to do on communication channels, and I wasn't sure exactly what the expectation was in terms of communication. So I kind of went with it as far as schools go. So when I'm communicating with students, so email, Google Chat, text, phone, in terms of how schools communicate with the community. Um, and I will say this because we are a public charter school. If we're talking in terms of the community, we also have ads on television, so where people can get to know who we are. But email is typically school issued email. This is coming from the administration, general information. And then for me, I only use email if I'm sending out mass information or if it's the preferred correspondence for that particular family. And then Google Chat is something that I use primarily that's immediate, school-based, convenient. I even message parents will message me on there in their their student's account. And text obviously is convenient. I don't know that it's as effective because it can be slow because I don't check it as often. And phone numbers are constantly changing, right? People get new phones, they move. So that's not always as connected as it needs to be. And then phone numbers are great if you have to talk about a lot of information. Love to talk on the phone and get that, particularly when I have new students and the school provides us with a Google Voice number. I will say this, and I wanted to put this at the bottom because we just had our EL program completely revamped this year. And so we're working on getting things like Google Translate or Interpreter, but that's one of the things that we talked about in one of the articles that we read. And we don't necessarily have that. Um, I think we have less than 10% of the students are in the EL program. So this is something that we're working on. And I know that when we do have meetings, we typically will have an interpreter, and I teach special ed. So I have had interpreters come to the meeting and then share that with you. I've had students interpret for their parents. I don't know if that's the best way to go, but I think that that's something that we could definitely work on as a school. All right. So talking about the political structure, because I think this really does affect, particularly in the culture that we live in today across the United States, it does affect how you communicate with families, and it does affect how communities get along with each other. So Idaho tends to be conservative. We have a Republican governor, senators, and congressmen. All of them are Republican. In the 2020 election, 63% voted for Donald Trump. Like it, don't like it. That's just a reality of an Idaho. Um, we are typically very Republican, with the exception of some of the more urban areas or areas where there is colleges, universities, or a lot of people coming in from that are not natives to Idaho. So we can see kind of how that plays out in the state of Idaho. Um, so yeah, and I think when you are working with families in schools, this is something, I mean, we don't like to talk about politics or any of that, but it's something that you do have to understand about people. Whether it's, going to go blue or red, it's always important to understand because those are so fundamental to who, kind of how we do things. So in terms of future concerns, this is the enrollment for the state of Idaho, and this is the 2023 enrollment. This is obviously posted. Um, so Asians, 1.1%, Black or African American, 1.2%. And this is interesting. Hispanic and Latino is 19% of the enrollment that were expected in the fall of 2023. So that's 20% of all of students that are coming into our schools are Hispanic. And then, of course, Native American, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, multiracial. And then, of course, white is 73%. So one of the things that I noticed when I looked at this is that the students that are coming in the school have a little bit different demographic than the entire state population. So if you recall in one of the earlier slides, we said almost 90%, 86 point something percent are white across the state, but the students that are coming to the school, it's only 73 or 74% that are white students. So when you're looking at things education wise, that's something to consider, that that although there's not as many Hispanic people in the population, they have more children that are enrolling in our school. So when we're thinking in terms of like how we address communication in the community within the school, that's something to realize, that 20% of the population of our classroom potentially could be Hispanic and Latino. All right, so here's my references. In terms of what I use to kind of gather all of this information. And then I wanted to kind of go through this. So I added this, this reference. So this standard is communicate through oral, written, and digital means within a larger organizational community and political context when advocating for the needs of their students and communities. So, and when I was thinking about this, I thought, we don't just provide an education to students in a vacuum, right? They don't come to the classroom, clean slates. They come to us kind of part of the community, part of their families, all of that. It takes a village, as they say, and we need to get to know our village when working to provide a rich learning environment for our students. We need to understand where these students are coming from in order for us to provide that education. We're all part of a team that works together for our students' success. If we are not working together, or if we don't understand each other, then it's not going to work. And it is primarily our job as educators to facilitate this open communication and engage students, families, and communities so that our students get the education they deserve and they can go on to be successful students. So it would be nice to put that responsibility back on the community and on families, but that is literally our job as educators, right? To reach out and include our communities and families in what we do at the school. So in my reflection, um, it did make me think a lot about what I do in the setting that I do it. I teach special ed, which is different than general ed, and I work in a virtual school, which is different than a brick and mortar setting. So I work directly with students, families, and the outside community agencies. So um, when I'm writing an IEP, particularly with high school students, I do need to look in the community. We have to write a transition plan. We're trying to connect them to the community and prepare them for their future. So this is something that I actually do with most of my students. When I'm successful at connecting all of these entities back to my student, they are also successful. So if I can get my students connected out and prepare them for the real world, they're going to be more prepared. Not only are they more successful academically, but also socially, emotionally, where they're able to develop self-efficacy, self-determination, and advocacy skills in regards to their education. Educating students isn't just about academics. It just isn't. I mean, we want that, of course, but we're trying to prepare them for the future. We want our students to develop skills that will provide them the skills necessary to be successful in life after graduation, when they will be part of a greater community. It is essential that we prepare them for this by facilitating engagement in their community while they are in school. That's our job. In addition, we want our community to take ownership in the education of the next generation as well by offering opportunities to both collaborate for both to collaborate, um, will not only benefit the student but the school and the community as a whole. So I think a lot of times, particularly in high school, we think, oh, we just got to get them credits and graduate them. But we want to connect them. We want them to be part of the community when they leave us, and so we need to be able to engage the community and families in that. And as far as relevancy, so understanding, engaging diverse students, families, and community members supports the learning of all students. It's win-win. Embracing diversity in schools and communities fosters a positive learning environment where all feel supported, accepted, valued, respected, and understood. We want to have that kind of open door and collaborative relationship where everybody feels like they have some ownership in the education of the next generation. By learning about and celebrating diversity of all cultures and backgrounds, we can create a rich learning environment that instills empathy, tolerance, and mutual respect. And certainly in the world that we live in, empathy, tolerance, and mutual respect is greatly needed. When schools, families, and communities work together, students benefit in and out of the classroom. There is collaboration, improvement, and shared resources where students benefit both academically and social emotionally. And that's what we want our students to be, not only academically prepared, but have the resilience and the acceptance to do the things that they need to do and be active participants and citizens in our communities. Students make connections and relationships outside of the classroom that will support lifelong learning and connection to their community. And that's what we want. I think we're seriously lacking that in the country today, where people are not connected with each other. And so this is a super important thing that I think that this type of activities and collaboration will help with. Now, my personal reflection. So, although I enjoyed taking a deeper dive into the demographics of communities in my school, it was also difficult. Like, I wasn't sure kind of how to tackle this. Because my students are from all parts of Idaho, not just one specific area, I realized that it takes a lot more effort to really understand all the different students and families that I work with. So when I get a new student, it makes a difference to me whether they're from East Idaho or whether they're from, a farming community or whether they're from, downtown Boise, those kinds of things. Idaho's a large state and each region has its own culture, and it will be my job to understand and engage each of these diverse communities. As an educator and a future administrator, I also realize that in a state like Idaho, where almost 90% of the population is white, it can be easy to overlook a much smaller ethnic or cultural groups And I can understand how these groups would feel left out or withdraw from engagement from schools. And when we may, and they may not feel like they're part of the majority, and it's our job to bring them in, to include them, and make the effort for that. So, and ensure that they have the same opportunities to engage and the same opportunities to learn as every other student. So, in terms of that, it really did make me think what I do every day to engage all my students. And that's it. So, thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.